The first thing I remember is the wind, sharp, restless, dragging the cold across the empty riverbank like it was searching for someone. I hadn't planned to stop by the old bridge that evening. I was just passing through, trying to outrun a day that had already drained every part of me. But then I saw movement beneath the broken railing, small tents, unmoving, except for the rise and fall of shallow breaths. A shepherd pup, no bigger than the rain-soaked jacket clinging to its trembling body, stood planted in the mud as if its paws were nailed there by fear. Its ears were pinned back, tail tucked. But its eyes were fixed on something behind it with a kind of desperate devotion you only see when a heart is holding on to the last thing it has. There was a sound too, a fragile whimper drifting under the roar of the river, almost swallowed by the wind. The pup growled at me, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion and determination, like it was guarding the only piece of the world it could still lose. And that was the moment everything inside me shifted. The river that evening moved with a strange kind of hunger, a restless pull that felt almost alive as it dragged the dying light downstream. I hadn't meant to stop at the old bridge. It wasn't a place where people willingly paused anymore. The storm clouds, pressing low above the valley, had already swallowed most of the sky, and a certain heaviness in the air warned me that night would fall faster than usual. I was only trying to get home, trying to outrun the long ache of a day that had folded itself into my bones. But something made me slow down as I approached the bridge, a flicker of movement, soft and uncertain, like the ghost of a heartbeat. At first I thought it was just the wind teasing the grass. The reeds along the bank often danced in unison, bending and rising as if whispering secrets to the river. But this was different. This was stillness interrupted by fear. So I stepped closer, feeling the wooden planks of the bridge moan under my weight, the old iron railing trembling as the weather shifted. And that's when I saw him. A tiny shepherd pup standing in the mud just beneath the bridge, trembling in a way that wasn't from the cold alone. His fur, damp and tangled, clung to his ribs as though trying to protect a body too fragile for a world too sharp. He stared directly at me the moment our eyes met. There was no bark, no scramble to run. Just a tense, breathless stillness, as if he had already spent the last of his strength fighting off the fear of being alone. His ears flattened, his small chest rising quickly, and the mud beneath his paws sucked gently every time he shifted his weight. It hit me then. This was not the posture of a pup lost or wandering. This was a guard stance, shaken but determined, fragile but fierce. Only after a moment did I hear the softer sound layered beneath the wind. A tiny whimper, faint enough that it could have been mistaken for the river dragging a pebble. But the pup heard it too. His body tightened. His gaze flicked back to something behind him, tucked into the shadows where the belly of the bridge met the slope of the bank. I followed his eyes, squinting through the dimming light, and the shape slowly revealed itself in pieces. A small bundle of fur curled into the mud, barely moving, breath so shallow that even the air seemed afraid to disturb it. A newborn shepherd pup, smaller than my palm, its coat still bearing the softness of a life that had barely unfolded. Its sides fluttered like a candle fighting the wind. The older pup, only a few months old himself, stood between us, guarding it as though the entire world pressed in from every direction. I felt his fear like a living thing, something that crawled out of the ground and wrapped itself around him, refusing to let go. But beneath that fear was something else, something almost unbearable in its purity. Devotion, a loyalty that didn't make sense for a creature so young. The wind picked up, threading cold fingers through my hair, carrying the metallic scent of rain. The sky grumbled overhead, and the darkness deepened its grip on the valley. I knew that if I didn't move now, if I didn't step forward, time itself might close its fist around those tiny breaths. So I crouched slowly, lowering myself until my hands touched the damp wood of the bridge. The pup's growl reached me, not loud, not threatening, but exhausted, like a warning held together by a fraying thread. It wasn't anger, it was desperation. "It's okay," I whispered, though I knew he wouldn't understand the words. Maybe he could understand the pause between them, the softness of my breathing, the way I kept my hands open and low. The river roared behind us, swallowing the rest of my voice. I took another step down, feeling the mud pull at my boots, grounding me in the moment. The pup's growl trembled again, and his legs nearly buckled under his own fear. He wanted to protect his sibling, but his strength was fading too fast. Up close, I could see the details the shadows had hidden, The crusted dirt around his eyes, the thorns caught in his tail, the bruised spot on his shoulder where he must have fallen or been struck. He'd been through something hard enough to carve survival into his tiny frame. And yet he hadn't given up. Not while that newborn breath still fluttered behind him. I extended my hand slowly. Time stretched thin, like a fragile thread snapping between heartbeats. The pup lowered his head, eyes narrowing, his body trembling as though holding the weight of a world he didn't know how to carry. But then the newborn whimpered again, a faint pleading sound, and something inside him cracked. His growl broke into a whine. His tail lowered. His paws shifted an inch to the side. It wasn't permission, not fully, but it was surrender born from exhaustion and hope tangled together. I moved closer, my knees sinking into the cold mud. The newborn pup felt weightless as I gently scooped it into my hands, its body warmer than I expected but frighteningly fragile. Its heartbeat fluttered under my fingers, quick and uneven, like a trapped bird desperate to take flight. The older pup leaned in, pressing his nose against his sibling as if confirming that I wasn't stealing the last piece of his world. His eyes softened, just a fraction, but enough to let the moment breathe. Thunder cracked somewhere in the distance, lighting up the river for a split second. The storm was coming faster now. I looked at both pups, at the mud clinging to their tiny forms, at the growing chill in the air, and a realization settled in my chest like a vow. If I left them here, the river would carry more than rain tonight. I pulled off my jacket, wrapping both pups in the worn fabric, feeling the older one shiver against my arm. As I stood up, cradling them close, his head rested weakly against my chest. Reluctant but trusting, defeated but hopeful. I didn't know how far I had to go. I didn't know if help would come in time. But as the first cold raindrops struck the bridge, I stepped into the storm with two fragile lives held against my heartbeat, knowing that whatever happened next, I could not let them face the darkness alone. The rain had a way of arriving without warning near the old bridge, falling not in gentle drops but in sharp, uneven slashes that felt like the sky had finally grown tired of holding itself together. By the time I climbed the slippery slope, both pups wrapped inside my jacket, the first wave of cold hit us with a startling cruelty. The older pup flinched at the sound, his ears twitching under the soaked fabric, but he didn't resist. His body pressed harder against my chest, as if he had finally decided that warmth, any warmth, was better than the lonely shivering he had endured beneath the bridge. The newborn, still limp and frighteningly quiet, lay cradled against my palm, its breaths faint like the fading rhythm of a distant drum. I didn't speak much as I walked. Words felt useless against the storm, swallowed before they could form meaning. Instead, I let my breathing steady the pups, hoping the rise and fall of my chest could somehow convince them the world hadn't completely turned against them. The older pup listened with wide, flickering eyes, as if measuring the safety of every step I took. His trust was uncertain, trembling, stitched together by instinct rather than confidence. But he didn't bite, didn't struggle, didn't try to escape. His fears were too heavy for that. He laid them all against me silently. The world around us dimmed into a blur of gray. The river roared behind us, louder, now that the rain fed its hunger. Trees along the path swayed and groaned, branches slashing through the wind like frantic hands. I adjusted my grip, holding the pups closer. The older one whimpered once, a soft, nearly apologetic sound, when the cold breeze slipped under my jacket. His nose nudged my collarbone, not in affection but in fragile desperation, as though asking silently for the world to be gentle just this once. After a few minutes, or maybe longer, time bends strangely when fear walks with you. I reached a small patch of shelter beneath a leaning willow tree. The rain still hit us, but less violently now, filtered through the curtain of drooping leaves. I knelt, my knees sinking into the muddy ground, and slowly loosened the jacket. The older pup lifted his head, his eyes scanning everything with the sharpness of a creature who had been living on survival's edge. He looked at my hands, then at the newborn, then at my face, searching for something I wasn't sure I had. Assurance, maybe, strength, a promise. The newborn whimpered again, a thin, almost translucent sound. The older pup licked its tiny ear, his tongue trembling as though the act itself demanded more energy than he had left. His devotion was heartbreaking. Too big for such a small body, too heavy for such wounded spirit. I felt something tighten in my chest, an ache both familiar and foreign. It had been a long time since anything small had depended on me. A long time since I had allowed myself to feel responsible for something I could lose. As I checked the newborn, gently running my fingers along its tiny ribs, I felt the faintest twitch, a fragile movement that felt like hope slipping through the cracks. The pup's belly rose unevenly, but it rose. I whispered something I don't even remember, something soft and cracked around the edges, the kind of words meant for the air more than for anyone listening. The older pup rested his chin on my wrist, his breath warm, despite the cold rain. His eyes, though worn and clouded with fear, held a question. "Can you save him?" I didn't know, but I knew I had to try. I unzipped the inner lining of my jacket, creating a deeper cocoon of warmth. The newborn went first, a weight light enough to make my hands tremble with the terrifying knowledge of how close it hovered to the boundary between life and loss. I tucked the pup inside, then gently guided the older one beside it. He resisted for a second, glancing toward the shadows of the bridge as though something still called him back, but exhaustion eventually won. He burrowed into the warmth, curling protectively around his sibling. His breathing steadied, slow and shaky, like a drum learning its rhythm again. The rain softened into a steady whisper, tapping gently at the leaves above us. I listened to it while catching my breath, my hands shaking from the cold and from the weight of everything I'd just seen. The world around us felt suspended, caught between storm and stillness. The willow branches swayed in slow arcs, drops sliding off their tips like tiny polished beads. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, but softer now, as though tired of shouting. I thought about how strange fate could, how a simple detour, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of movement beneath a bridge could rearrange the path of a life. I didn't know these pups. I didn't know where they came from, who they belonged to, or what cruelty had pushed them to such a fragile edge. But sitting there holding them in the fading storm, I felt something stir inside me, something quiet yet undeniable. A place that had been empty for too long suddenly felt occupied. The older pup lifted his head once more, nudged my hand with a cautious touch. His eyes weren't entirely trusting yet, but something in them had softened, like ice breaking under warmth. He let his chin rest against my palm, his small body pressed closer to the sibling he refused to abandon. I stroked his head gently, feeling the knots in his damp fur, the tension in his tiny muscles slowly unraveling. When the rain finally eased into a mist, I knew it was time to move again. Standing, I tightened the jacket around the pups, securing them against my chest. The older pup didn't protest this time. He closed his eyes, his ear pressed to my heartbeat, as if searching for a rhythm steady enough to guide him out of the darkness he had known. "I've got you," I whispered, though the wind carried my voice away. And maybe the words were meant for me too, as reassurance, as a promise, as a beginning. And with that fragile warmth held tightly against me, I stepped back onto the path, determined not to let these tiny lives break alone. The forest was still breathing with the cold memory of the night when the puppies woke up. The sunlight filtered through narrow gaps in the trees, painting soft golden patterns on the damp ground. Their tiny bodies, still curled from sleep, twitched as they adjusted to the chilly morning air. For the first time since the rescue, they looked a bit calmer, though fear still lingered in their eyes like a shadow refusing to fade. I knelt beside them, letting my hand hover above their trembling heads before gently touching the nearest one. "It's okay," I whispered. "Ajsi tamakle nahio." The smallest puppy, the one with the uneven white patch on his forehead, sniffed my fingers cautiously before leaning his head against my palm. The other two followed slowly, their hesitation melting into a quiet curiosity. But the forest wasn't quiet in return. Somewhere beyond the clearing, branches snapped under heavy steps, too heavy to belong to any harmless animal. The puppies instantly stiffened, their ears perked, their tiny bodies pressing against each other in fear. I lifted my head and listened more closely. Another step, another crunch. Something was moving. I knew the forest well enough to read its warnings. Whatever was approaching was big. I scooped up the puppies quickly. They whimpered at the sudden lift, but quieted when I pulled them close to my chest. "Eesh, sabthik hai," I murmured, though my own breath wasn't steady. My eyes scanned the trees, the shifting shadows, the faint trails of movement in the distance. Then it appeared. A large silhouette stepped into view. Not a predator, but a full-grown German shepherd, tall, muscular, and carrying the kind of presence that could silence even the wind. His coat was weathered, streaked with mud, and tangled with leaves. His ribs were faintly showing, as though hunger had been his closest companion for too long. The puppies recognized him instantly. A whine escaped their throats, high-pitched, pleading, heartbreakingly familiar. The dog's ears shot up at her. His eyes widened. And in that moment I realized the truth. This was their father. He took a cautious step forward, his gaze fixed on the puppies in my arms. There was no aggression in his posture, only desperation. A deep, low rumble left his chest, not a growl, but a call. The puppies responded with tiny cries, stretching their necks toward him. But he didn't rush. He didn't leap. He simply stared, torn between hope and fear, as if he couldn't decide whether this reunion was real or just another cruel trick played by the world. I slowly lowered the puppies to the ground. They stumbled toward him, tails tucked, bodies shaking. The father lowered himself too, chest pressed to the earth as he nudged each one with trembling care. He sniffed them, checked them, touched them with his muzzle as though counting them again and again to make sure they were truly alive. When the smallest puppy let out a soft bark, the father responded with a sound so gentle it almost broke me, a whimper of relief, heavy with days or maybe weeks of searching. But the moment didn't last long. The father suddenly stiffened. His head snapped to the side, his ears pinned forward. His muscles tightened, transforming his expression from gentle relief to fierce alertness. The puppies huddled under him. I followed his gaze, and my heart dropped. On the far side of the clearing, 3 shapes emerged. Not wolves, not wild dogs, men, hunters. Each carried a wooden club or a metal rod. Their clothes were dirty, torn, and layered with the kind of greed I had seen too many times. These weren't forest workers or lost hikers. These were the ones who trapped animals, sometimes to sell them, sometimes just for the cruelty of it. Yuoyahin Bagatha, one of them said loudly. A puppies by Hosaktai Hain Soth, Sayada Paisa Mil Jagay, another replied. The father dog placed himself fully between the men and his puppies. His growl echoed through the forest, a deep, thunderous warning that made even the leaves tremble. The puppies pressed against his legs. Fear crawled through my body, but something else rose inside me too. Anger. Real, burning anger at the thought of these animals being hunted again. One of the men stepped forward. Haro Yar Kutahida High. I stepped in front of the father dog before he could lunge. Apiche Raho, I said, my voice loud enough to cut through the clearing. Ye area protected high. Tumlog illegal hunting car Raho. They laughed, but one of them hesitated, the youngest. His eyes darted to a mark carved on the nearest tree, a government-protected wildlife zone. His face paled. Mushkilmi par sakte hain, he muttered. The leader scowled. Akoi nahi pekrega, yekat hamore kam ki hain. That was enough. I stepped even closer, blocking their path completely. Bakir karnakia chatotam, fabekna hai, he answered plainly. Abat pesav milta hai. Before he could say more, the father dog growled so sharply that the man stepped back. The tension snapped like a wire. For a moment I thought a fight would break out, but then the forest itself intervened. More footsteps echoed behind the hunters. Multiple, heavy coordinated. A ranger patrol. The hunters froze. A voice boomed. A stop right there. Drop anything in your hands. The men panicked instantly. 2 dropped their weapons and bolted through the trees. The leader tried to hide his rod behind him, but the rangers rushed forward, grabbing him by the shoulders. Within seconds, the forest shifted again, from danger to relief. The puppies whimpered softly. I turned back to the father dog. His body relaxed only slightly, his head lowered. His eyes softened. For the first time, he seemed to believe that his puppies were safe. The rangers approached me. Opthik ho? One asked. Iming thikun, I said, glancing at the dog family. Lekin ye log ye bahut thake huahain. Inin madad kizarat high, the ranger nodded. Shelter tack escort car denge. As we began walking out of the forest, the father shepherd walked beside me, not too trusting, not too distant, just close enough to show he understood. This wasn't the end of the fight. This was the beginning of a promise. The forest path opened into a narrow trail that wound between tall grass and scattered rocks. The morning sun had now risen fully, warming the chilled air, and the puppies seemed to feel it first. Their tiny paws lifted more eagerly, their steps becoming lighter as the father shepherd walked like a silent guardian beside them. His body still showed exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert. Every sound, Every rustle, every scent mattered to him. I walked just ahead of them, matching my pace to theirs. The rangers followed in a loose formation, speaking softly into their radios as they coordinated the capture of the remaining hunters somewhere deeper in the forest. But here, away from the danger, everything felt calmer, safer, almost peaceful. One of the rangers moved closer. "Oppenheim Kitney Dersi Dek Rahain?" he asked. "Pamaskal Ratsi," I replied. "Inki Boke Faske Thay, Father Alagtha, Sha Dunta Furta Raha." The ranger nodded. "A German shepherd's bohat loyal Hodehain. Apni family Kapata Nehi Sote." As if hearing his name in spirit, the father shepherd glanced at us, his tail flicking once, not in friendliness but in acknowledgement. He didn't trust humans completely. Not yet, but he understood one thing. I was not the enemy. The smallest puppy, still half stumbling and half running, pressed his side against my boot as we walked. "Be careful," I murmured, scooping him for a moment. His tiny body melted into my arm, warm and fragile. But a soft bark from the father made him wiggle, demanding to be put down, wanting to walk on his own feet like his siblings. I smiled and set him down. Ahead, the forest thinned, replaced by a dusty road that led toward the regional animal shelter, a small but well-maintained facility run by a team who truly cared about the animals brought to them. I knew this road well. I had walked rescued dogs here many times. But something about this journey felt different, heavy, meaningful. The puppies slowed as the forest ended, as if afraid to leave the only world they had known. The father dog paused too, standing between shadows and sunlight, his body half turned back as though part of him still lived inside that forest. His ears twitched, his nose lifted, taking in the new sense of the open world. Cars, distant voices, faint traces of other dogs. He hesitated. I kneeled down and extended a hand gently. "Come on," I said softly. "Ye safe Jagahai, Tamari family Yahan secure Hogi." For a long moment, he didn't move. The puppies circled him, whining, tugging at his fur. And then, slowly, he stepped forward, one step, then another, until he walked beside me again. The road was quiet, but not empty. People occasionally passed by, some glancing with curiosity, some with delight at the sight of 3 wobbling puppies and their proud, wild-looking father.
The elderly woman stopped and smiled.
"Hitne Piari Hain," she whispered. One of the puppies tried to walk toward her, but the father placed a protective paw in front of him, pulling him back. "A protective type," she chuckled. "He's been through a lot," I explained. When the shelter finally came into view, a white building with a large fenced yard and shaded areas, it felt like a small oasis. The scent of food, medicine, clean water, and gentle human hands drifted toward us like a promise of peace. The puppies immediately perked up, their tails wagging as they caught the scent of other animals. But the father shepherd froze. His body stiffened. He stared at the building as though unsure whether this was a sanctuary or another trap. His ears flattened, his tail lowered, his muscles tightened. I approached him and sat on my knees. "Listen," I whispered, "a mine Tumhari family kor nahi karn donga. Ye log madad kart hain. No cages, no hunters, no danger." The dog didn't move, so I lowered my forehead gently until it touched the top of his head, a gesture of trust, slow and respectful. For a moment, he trembled. His breath hitched. Then he let out a soft, defeated exhale and nudged my chin lightly, accepting the moment. Inside the shelter yard, 2 volunteers hurried over. "You found them?" one asked, surprised. "3 puppies," I said, pointing, "and their father. They've been through a lot." The volunteers crouched low, giving space. They didn't reach out. They didn't rush. They simply waited for the puppies to approach. The biggest puppy waddled over first, sniffing a volunteer's shoe. The second followed. The third sat between my legs, undecided, glancing repeatedly at his father. The shepherd walked slowly behind them, his shoulders shifting like he was ready to react to anything. The volunteers opened a small pen, not a cage, but a soft, padded enclosure meant for families needing temporary care. Bowls of clean water were placed inside, blankets, fresh food, soft toys. The puppies ran in immediately, tumbling over each other. The father didn't. He remained at the entrance, staring as though the enclosure reminded him too much of capture, too much of fear. His breathing grew shallow, his legs locked, his tail curled inward. I stepped beside him. "This isn't a trap," I said quietly. "You can leave any time. They won't lock you in." A volunteer added, "We'll keep the gate open. He can come and go." Slowly, the father stepped in, halfway, then stopped, eyes darting, heart racing. His puppies clung to his legs, tugging at his tail, climbing onto his paws. Their presence steadied him. He took a final breath and walked fully inside. The gate remained open. The father shepherd curled his long body around the puppies, pulling them close. For the first time since I had met him, he rested his head on the ground, not in fear but in surrender, in relief. I sat outside the pen, watching quietly. "You did a good thing," a volunteer said softly behind me. I shook my head. No, they did. They survived. The father looked at me one more time before closing his eyes. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that looked a lot like hope. The morning sun spilled gold across the shelter yard, painting every corner in warmth that had felt impossible the night before. The 3 puppies tumbled through the soft grass, exploring their new world with cautious delight. Their tiny paws left wet imprints on the soil as they chased each other, occasionally collapsing into a heap of fur and tiny whimpers. The father shepherd moved among them, a silent shadow, his head low but eyes watchful. His body no longer trembled from fear, but carried the weight of something new, responsibility tempered with relief. I sat on the edge of the yard, still damp from the forest trek, watching the family adjust to this strange new chapter. For the first time since I had found them beneath the old bridge, I could breathe without panic clawing at my chest. The world was quieter here, gentler. Yet I knew the storm that had brought them to me wasn't just outside anymore. It had lived inside all of us, threading through nerves, heartbeat, and memory. The smallest puppy tugged at the father's tail, squeaking in frustration when he didn't immediately respond. The older sibling nudged the newborn playfully, but then froze mid-step as the father turned his head toward them, growling softly. It wasn't anger. It was guidance, protection. A line drawn between danger and safety, learned the hard way. Watching him, I understood how much loyalty could cost, how love could demand a strength we might not think we had. A volunteer approached with a small bowl of food. The puppies scattered toward it immediately, their hunger outweighing all hesitation. The father shepherd lingered behind, sniffing the air, his gaze drifting to the edge of the yard. I could almost see him calculating, judging, learning that this world, though softer than the forest, could be unpredictable. Then, slowly, he approached the bowl, careful and deliberate. He ate, his body relaxed with each bite, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I stood and approached the enclosure, letting the puppies run to me for brief pats and scratches. Their fur was soft, sticky from mud, but it carried warmth that seemed to soak into me too, stitching together parts of my heart I hadn't realized had frayed. I knelt beside the father, stroking the thick fur along his neck. His eyes met mine briefly, a slow, steady acknowledgement. Not trust entirely, but something heavier, more profound, a shared history of survival, and the understanding that he and his family had been given a chance to begin again. Time stretched as I watched them. The yard became a stage for small miracles. The newborn rising on wobbly legs, the older siblings tussling and tumbling with newfound energy. The father shepherd finally lying down, letting the puppies climb over him in a play he had once thought impossible. A gentle breeze moved through the shelter, carrying the scent of grass, clean water, and life that had been so close to slipping away. The past night's terror felt like a distant shadow, a memory etched into muscle and bone, but not capable of harming again. I thought about the old bridge, about the river, rushing and relentless as though it wanted to carry everything away. The pups had survived there, clinging to each other, clinging to me. And I had survived too, held together by the fragile promise of 2 small lives so weak yet so unyielding. In their eyes I had seen determination, grief, and love beyond measure. I had felt their fear, their courage, and their unwavering devotion, and I realized something. Rescue wasn't just an act of saving. It was a mutual surrender to hope. A soft whistle drew my attention. One of the shelter volunteers had retrieved a small harness and leash for the father shepherd. He approached slowly, sniffing the air, evaluating. I knelt and held the leash out gently. For a moment he hesitated, every muscle taut, every nerve alert. Then, as if deciding the world was safe enough, he allowed his head to dip and his paw to step forward. The leash was loose, but it didn't matter. He walked beside me like he had known me for longer than a few hours, like he had decided that I too could be trusted. The puppies followed, bounding in circles, occasionally tripping over each other, squeaking and barking in the pure joy of movement. their tiny lungs filled with the soft morning air, their bodies untangling from exhaustion and fear. They tumbled, rolled, and scrambled toward the yard gate, as if testing the limits of this new freedom. I watched their shadows stretch long on the sunlit grass, and in that moment, the world felt both fragile and infinite. Even as I stood there, I knew the story wasn't fully over. The father shepherd would take time to heal completely. The puppies would still have moments of doubt, hesitation, and fear, and I too would carry fragments of that night forever woven into my memory like threads of silver and shadow. But this, right now, was proof that life, no matter how battered, could be restored. That families, chosen or born, could find their place even after the most harrowing nights. I took a deep breath and let my gaze sweep over them one last time. The father shepherd nudged the smallest puppy gently, a nudge of reassurance. The older puppies yipped, chasing each other in circles, tails high, and I realized how powerful presence could be. Simply being there, steady, unwavering, holding space for fear to dissolve. Sometimes survival is enough. Sometimes love is enough, and sometimes a single act of courage can create ripples that carry further than we imagine. The river beneath the old bridge would still run, storms would still come, but they wouldn't reach here. Not in this yard, not in the hearts of these puppies, not in the father who now knew that safety existed outside the shadows. And as I turned to leave the enclosure, feeling the sun warm my back and the gentle wind whisper through the trees, I knew I had witnessed something rare. A miracle shaped by small paws, soft whimpers, relentless loyalty, and a courage that refused to yield. They didn't need me anymore, not fully, but they had changed me irrevocably, permanently, in a way that no storm, no river, no fear could ever undo. I walked away slowly, leaving the father shepherd and his puppies behind, their bodies tangled in warmth and sunlight. Their shadows stretched long in the morning, unbroken, unafraid, and the image stayed with me as I left. The true weight of survival, the gift of trust, and the endless promise that some rescues don't just save lives, they redirect them forever.